Thanks so much for joining us. Ottawa is booking seats on commercial airlines to help get Canadians out of Lebanon, urging them to leave now while flights are still available. This comes as Israel and Hezbollah exchanged more airstrikes today, just one day after Israel confirmed it killed Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah in a targeted attack on the group's headquarters in Beirut's southern suburbs. Earlier today, Hezbollah confirmed another senior leader was also killed. This escalation in attacks has sparked concerns about a wider regional war as Israel, Hezbollah, and Iran all consider their next moves. Iran is now calling for an emergency meeting at the UN Security Council. I spoke with Canada's ambassador to the UN, Bob Rae, earlier this morning. Ambassador Rae, nice to see you again.
Thank you, Rosemary. Good to see you too.
I want to start obviously by asking you about the killing of Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah and how significant you think that is for what is happening in the region.
Oh, I think it's huge. Nasrallah was an extraordinarily influential figure in the whole region, in the whole of the Middle East. He was a very powerful speaker, and a good friend of mine who's an Arab speaker said, "You need to understand that Nasrallah's voice was every bit as powerful as Gamal Nasser's voice used to be on the radio back many decades ago. So he had an ability to mobilize the Arab street in a way that very few other speakers did have. So his killing is extremely significant. We'll see what impact it has. From a practical point of view, I think it's not just his killing, but the fact that many, many other Hezbollah leaders have been killed, plus all the events of the last 2 weeks, have really been a huge setback for Hezbollah and for Iran and for Hamas. I mean, I think this, from a military perspective, things have changed quite significantly in the immediate term. What it means for the long term is another subject.
A spokesperson for the IDF says that Israel was preparing for, as you know, the possibility of a ground incursion, but that it wasn't the only option being considered. Do you think that killing on Friday, and indeed any sort of a bombing into Lebanon, marks the beginning of a new phase of a broader regional war? How are you interpreting that idea that there could be a ground incursion?
Well, I think the simplest answer is to say we don't know.
Sure.
There are many different possibilities. One is that the impact of the bombing in Beirut and the killing of Nasrallah and the senior leadership, not only of Hezbollah, but also there are many Iranian leaders who were killed as well. Yes. And so you need to figure out, is it necessary to do a ground war? Israel's how can I put it? Success in the ground war in Lebanon it has been tried twice in a big way over the last 20 years, has not been a huge success. It's been it's easier to get in than it is to get out, and the Israelis know that. So I don't think it's their preferred option, but they will do what they feel is necessary. But the critical thing I keep coming back to is to say, there may be military solutions, but they're not necessarily political solutions. And people need to understand the difference between those two things.
Well, I wonder how surprised you are that there has not been any retaliation from Iran yet. And in fact, that they seem to be sort of keeping their cards close to their chest or unsure about how to respond to this.
Well, Iran is quite cynical. Iran is quite prepared to put two groups, Hamas and Hezbollah, to work for them. They don't want to take risks themselves because they know full well that if they do if the war is extended in that way, it will not go well for them, and they know that. And so I do think Iran is a tough calculator, and they have to calculate what is the meaning of these setbacks and what does that mean. Now, they're not going to declare surrender, they're not going to give up, but I do think it's they're not naive, and they have made what I consider to be the ultimately cynical calculation that the lives of others is fine, but their own lives is something else. And I think everyone has to understand that.
Yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel is at a, quote, historic turning point. And as you know, on Friday, he also gave a defiant speech at the UN. I'm not sure how that went over, but what do you make of how the Israeli government is positioning itself when it comes to the idea of this broader conflict?
Well, I mean, I think that the only thing, there were a couple of things missing from Mr. Netanyahu's speech. The first one was any empathy for all of the people who have died, women and children who've been killed in Gaza. I thought the fact that he was not able to say anything about that was sad. I mean, really a missing link that clearly anybody else would see. And the second one is that the issue of Palestinian statehood is one that he obviously completely avoided in his speech, but in his looking out for all the other things that might happen in terms of the region, all the other countries in the region are not going to really make big moves without progress on the Palestinian issue, and that is the issue that Mr. Netanyahu desperately doesn't want to talk about, and yet he's going to have to talk about it if he's serious about wanting some kind of regional settlement. There won't be a regional settlement without a resolution of the Palestinian conflict. It's that simple.
The pressing issue right now seems to be, well, maybe it's not the pressing issue, but one of them. Canada, the US, France, and others calling for that 21-day ceasefire that Israel has said it's not interested in. What happens to that request now, Ambassador? Does it continue? Is it more likely or less likely?
Well, Israel's view might be different now that they've done what they've done.
Yeah.
I do think the ceasefire is important in order to allow some kind of humanitarian assistance to the people who are being displaced in Lebanon. And I think what Israel is saying is we want something that's more long-term so we can deal with our getting people back to the northern communities where they've lived for many, many years. And I think that's totally understandable. I do think Israel's security interests are real, and I think that their concerns are or what has led to every step that they've taken. I think what we believe, though, is that a real steps towards a political resolution of the broader conflict and the issues in the region are going to be necessary to get to greater security for everybody. A purely military approach will not produce deep political security. Its solutions will only be temporary, and everyone needs to understand that. That I think is the reality of the situation.
I know this isn't your sort of part of the file, the getting Canadians out of Lebanon, so I won't ask you too many questions about that, but just whether you think that's something that might be needed, or do you think that we'll get to a ceasefire before thousands of people have to be taken out by their governments?
Well, I think that's what people are wrestling with. I think right now, having to move that many people is obviously not easy to do.
Yeah.
But I also think that I know that it's something that is preoccupying our own government, and I'm sure is preoccupying other governments, the French, the British, the Americans, and others, where there are a lot of dual citizens who are living in Lebanon, and so I guess all I can say is I think everybody's working for a ceasefire. Everybody's aware of what the consequences are if the war gets worse. But I do think that we need to keep our eye on the need for two ceasefires, the exchange of hostages, in freeing up the hostages in Gaza. I think there's a lot of ways in which this thing could turn to the better, but let's not be naive about how easy that's going to be. It's still going to be a tough series of negotiations and decisions that will be ongoing for the next while.
Ambassador Ray, nice of you to make the time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody.
Many Lebanese Canadians are worried about family members over there. Ginwa Yassin is one of them and joins us from Vancouver this morning. Ginwa, thanks for making the time.
Oh, you're welcome.
Tell me, what have the last few days been like for your family in Lebanon? What are you hearing from them?
There's a lot of fear, and a lot of them were displaced because some of them were living in the south and in the suburbs. although they're not Hezbollah members, which is something people should know, that this is not just an area where Hezbollah members live. And yeah, it's basically a lot of fear, uncertainty, and there's also the livelihood of people, because even their jobs are at a pause now. So
Sure.
a lot of worry about stability.
Sure. And where are they staying then? If it is not safe where they live, where have they gone, and are they safe where they are now?
Right now in Beirut, we don't know who is safe, because I just heard that they asked for a building to be evacuated in a usually non-Hezbollah area at all, and purely residential area. But everyone, my family, everyone is in Beirut right now. Those who were in the south or in the suburbs, they moved to relatives' homes. And so I lived the war in 2006, where we had in our home my uncle and his family. And so families start to just live together and just try to be safe.
Well, I was going to say, you were evacuated from Lebanon in 2006. So how are you living through this? What are you thinking about, given that you had that experience?
I wasn't evacuated. I had to live the whole war, 33
Oh, you did?
days.
Okay.
My sisters were able to go because they had visas in other countries. But just living 2006, I promised myself that I will never live a war once again in my whole life. And I will never let my family live it, but then my family can't leave.
So the family that you have there, they are not Canadian citizens. Do they have Do they have citizenship or residency anywhere else that they could go to?
Only my mom and dad can go to my sisters in Romania, but I'm not able to convince my father to leave. And my brother doesn't have visa anywhere, and flights are being canceled anyway. My brother doesn't want to leave either.
Yeah.
Because he said, at least I'm helping some families move, some displaced people with my car, and I can be here. If I need to die here, I'll die here. And obviously it's not something I can cope with.
No. What kinds of things can you do for them? Is there anything you can do for them from here?
I started a fundraiser, interestingly, GoFundMe, just for emergencies, if we need to move them, if we need to rent an apartment somewhere else. And I may not be able to get those funds that are being donated to me, because there's a sanction on Lebanon, apparently, and we need to justify who's taking the money, where it's being spent. And I'm waiting right now to know from GoFundMe if that's going to be possible. And I think it's inhumane to be put in this situation.
You hear that Canada has booked some commercial spaces for people to leave, but really is telling people who have Canadian citizenship to leave immediately. Do you worry that we are going to end up in a situation like 2006?
I think it's happening already. Yeah. It's already 2006 and worse.
Yeah. What about this call for the 21-day ceasefire? Do you think that might happen now that the leader of Hezbollah has been killed?
I mean, everything that's been happening since October 7 has pointed to me now that this has been planned for in this way. You don't go into a war that's so big just because. In 2006, the excuse was that two Hezbollah members went across the border and kidnapped a soldier or something. Yeah. And then there was a huge war for 33 days. I think what's happening behind the scenes is that those two parties have their intelligence, they have their spies, they know where the other's at in preparation. I think ideologically they're both heading towards the big war where one of them will end. And then each of them does it differently. One does it in a bit of a more humane way than the other. And then I think October 7 happened for this reason. I think the plan has always been that's my personal opinion, to finish with Gaza and then get to Lebanon. And the plan for the ambassador was just saying a military solution. I think Israel has only ever been operating through a military approach because they don't see that even the right for these other people to be negotiated with politically, to have a right to some part of this land, so for them it's
Guinwa, I'm out of time, but I really appreciate you speaking with us. I hope your family remains safe. I know it's a difficult time to be so far away from them.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Nice to meet you.